Afternoon, everybody. Slightly different down in the southeast. I come from a two-tier authority. Kent County Council has 12 local planning authorities and one development corporation and their own planning authority that we do statutory consultee role for. Our geology is quite different. A third of the county is chalk, a third of it's wheeled or London clay, and the other third is this mixed up mess that may or may not be permeable. So today, Paul has asked me to talk about our policy, our delivery in Kent. We're going to, this is sort of a split deal. I do the approver section for a development, and the presentation that follows is the developer and the consultant talking about the same location. So we haven't looked at each other's presentations, and it'll be a surprise to both of us what we've said about each other. So I'm going to give the development context for that development, challenges and successes, and the view on partnership working in relation to that development. So there are three layers within Kent County's own policy. We have a strategic provision. This was a document that was produced by Southeast 7 across the southeast. It's not actually 7 authorities, it's something like 9. It goes all the way from Kent across to Hampshire. This was done probably about 7-8 years ago by ACOM. It's a good first thing to throw out at someone, and it gives you good direction on how you master plan for sustainable drainage systems. The second layer is the layer that sits in the middle that we use that sets our policy position on how you incorporate drainage within planning. And we've done this because we had this document called Kent Design, which has technical appendices called Making It Happen, which had a sustainable drainage chapter. And that's been around since for quite some time. So we already had technical information in relation to adoption of drainage in the highway. So we needed something that covered, more in the middle. That's how we ended up coming up with our policy statement. So that policy statement itself was first written in 2015 because we had to take the non-statutory technical standards and say how we were going to deliver it within Kent. Ideally, from our perspective, our problem was that we could provide information in relation to quantity control and operation, but as a two-tier authority, we didn't really have the ability to make specification on landscaping and open space provision. We are not the local planning authority. So we had 10 policy statements. The first 6 or 7 basically reflected the non-statutory technical standards, and the remaining 4 dealt with water quality, amenity, biodiversity and landscape. But with the introduction of the new planning policy framework, new paragraphs requiring multifunctionality, the statement within the NPPF says that they should have due regard of the lead local flood authority. We're now in a better position to push our requirements in relation to water quality, biodiversity, amenity and landscape. So we've had our policy document revised this year. Consultation has closed. We had peer review from a technical specialist, which was very much appreciated. And it's been, I guess, generally widely accepted. We've had expansions, certainly in the relationship to multifunctionality, and we've included the requirements for verification. So I think we're going to be in a much better position going forward to make more demands than where we've been up to now. The other document, the technical appendices, was quite interesting because we've actually started revisions on it when we were going to become the SAB's approving body, and we had quite a bit of technical review, additional technical information, and then it sat around for about 3 or 4 years because we had technical drawings which no one was going to basically put their hand up and say they owned. We had detailed drawings for drainage provision, and it had really no owner, and if we were going to go and change it for sustainable drainage, before I put my name onto it, I wanted to make sure that highways were quite ready to get rid of it. So we now have a new document that was again published this year. It expands the role, it goes beyond adoptable highways. It gives a technical representation of how we would like things to be presented. It has a lot of information on ground investigation, that being one particular issue that we do have concerns about, certainly with stability and things like the Hythe formation. It's also got aspects in relation to wider flood risk, the 1 in 100-year flood events, etc. So the technical manual fills in a lot of those extra bits and pieces that we need our consultants to be looking at. But as a two-tier authority, we're actually reliant on what may or may not be provided in local plan policy. So of our 12 local authorities, we have only 2 who have very specific requirements in relation to sustainable drainage. The local plan policies more often than not reflect what's generally needed. There'll be a sustainable drainage policy, there'll be a flood risk policy, but we have Ashford Borough Council, which has got a supplementary planning document, which was produced in 2010 for sustainable drainage, and they also have an open space SPD, which was produced in 2012. This does set discharge rates within Ashford, and they've been, I think, well accepted. It was all based on the strategic flood risk assessment. But interestingly enough, the 2 policies together do result in a slight conflict. The open space policy says that if you've got retained water within a drainage feature, it won't be counted to the open space allocation, which then sets you up in this sort of little sort of circuit that we've had one scheme that's come through. We had 2 nice ponds, quite a nice scheme, but because they weren't hitting their open space allocation, the ponds became cratered systems, which was a bit of a loss of opportunity from my perspective. Ashford have come through for a review or a reassessment of their discharge rates, which they've undertaken through their strategic flood risk assessment process. Similarly, that's what Canterbury have done. For many years, they've had a set rate of 4 litres per second per hectare, and they have come through for another review in their SFRA, and they've set up these 4 zones of... do I have a pointer? Yeah, 4 different zones, infiltration in the north and very low rates in the south. Our view is that where you've got local policy that's been set, we will defer to that, we will support it, and we will provide the response to that within our consultation process. It's just unfortunate that our other 10 authorities haven't gone the same route, and we don't have the same strength of policy sitting behind us. So that does mean that the way we deliver sustainable drainage within Kent may be not as strong as other unitaries or other, I guess, authorities who've wrapped in water quality and biodiversity and amenity into their own policy documents themselves. So for the most part, a third of Kent is infiltrating. We do have permeable pavement. We adopt permeable pavement if it's free draining. Then we have these other things that over the years look disgusting. And the problem is that we've had ponds that have come through. They've not necessarily been looked at by anybody and they're not maintained. But then we also have some nice quiet schemes that have been implemented. So the primary driver, as I said, has been the management of water flow. And it is because we are limited, I think, by being a 2-tier authority, except where we've got these extra strength coming through from our local plan policies. That's not to say that we don't coordinate and deliver biodiversity and water quality gains in projects, but it's often being driven by who the applicant is, who the client is, and what they're prepared to provide. One thing that's become quite clear in the last couple of years, I've had 2 appeal cases, is that the strength of your technical approval is quite important. What you require within a scheme needs to be technically demonstrated. So for drainage schemes where there is a lack of ground information and things like that, we've been in quite a good position. But strangely enough, I've been in situations where I've been demanding to have a surface water system or surface water pond and gone before an inspectorate and they've said, no, this is a technical solution, it can be provided in other means. So I think our ability to deliver good schemes can be hampered by, I guess, the framework in which we're delivering it within planning. So the development we're going to talk about today is part of Obsolete. Obsolete is on the River Thames. It incorporates the Swanscombe Peninsula where they were going to put Paramount Park. It's a brownfield development and it sits between Gravesham and Dartford. So the train station at Obsolete International was built in 2007 and EDC started taking planning powers in 2015. So planning has been going on in the Obsolete area since about 2000, 2005. The planning applications will have both Gravesham and Dartford planning application numbers. And the EDC team, I think, are a little bit hampered because, in actual fact, a lot of planning approvals have already been granted over that land area. So they started getting going, and then with the house building crisis happening in 2007, 2009, a lot of the land didn't come forward and wasn't built. So there was a lot of, I guess you could say, a lull in the total area of what was happening. And things started to kick up again in about 2011, 2012, 2013. And then recently, the government has said, well, actually, we're going to give you a new garden city status, and have really pushed again for the delivering of 50,000 homes. So EDC is a bit of a funny bird, really, because I think it's been focused on, it is a garden city. The presumption is that it's going to be very green, but it's actually has an incredibly high density. So the specific development, I'll just go back. Obsolete Green, it's this little area here. It is the location, it used to be the North Fleet West Grid substation. It had a huge substation in the lower end, power lines across the middle of the site. So it got granted for 900 units in 2005. Demolition started 2013, remediation and archaeology came through. But we're talking about a site which is quite steep and had a lot of issues with it, and a constraints analysis for it would, it's got contamination issues, it's got all these other sort of things happening. The drainage plan came through in 2014 with, from WSP, and the reserve matters was submitted in 2016. So we've had very little opportunity to influence this scheme. It was sort of gifted, it came through with the way that it was, and we haven't really been able to, I guess, influence what is delivered. And so I think that's probably one of the main challenges that we've had, certainly with a lot of the schemes in EDC and other very large schemes that we've seen in Kent. As lead local flood authority, in actual fact, there often is a long planning time frame for some of the larger sites. And even though they might be starting on the ground now, it's actually been in the process, in the works of being delivered, probably 5 to 10 years. This particular site doesn't have a watercourse, and its only outfall was a highway culvert. And I got called probably in early 2013, 2014, WSP, and they said, Bronwyn, where's this water going to go? Oh, there's a highway culvert there. And there was no watercourse on the other side. And so we agreed an approach that is where the land went, that's where the water would drain to, and we would just accept that the water would go through the highway culvert. Interestingly enough, EDC want to build on the parcel of land on the other side of the highway, and there's sort of not necessarily, I guess, a good sensitivity to the fact that the water is going to flow through from one parcel of land to the other, and it's something that has to be mentioned quite often. So I've mentioned that it was quite steep, and there was a lot of groundworks across the site. And that's resulted in a particular type of geometry for the basins themselves. And, we were discussing across the team earlier, and we had a site visit with the larger flood and water management team in the 2, 3, 4 months ago. And the main question we were asking was, at what point is a pond too deep? Now, I'm not talking about necessarily water depth, I'm talking about from the invert of the pond to the top of the bank. And to be honest, these days, if we were to redesign this site, we would probably have quite a different approach to pond design. But we are where we are. They needed building platforms at certain levels, and this is the way the site has come forward. The other thing that's become quite a challenge is phase 1 is now occupied, and EDC is being faced with a lot of questions from actual residents. There's a wetland at the bottom of the site, and one afternoon, one of the residents, the lady, mother, couldn't find her small child and got very upset, spent a number of hours looking for this child, and was exceedingly concerned that the child had ended up in the wetland at the bottom of the site. And the worry then was this question of how, are these things safe? The thing is that there isn't a lot of water, there isn't hardly any water in any of the basins, and they are vegetative. And so there is, I think, this real problem that we are dealing with residents living in these types of communities, that they need to be aware of what their environment is and they need to understand how they are supposed to be living with it. This has also led on to a question on later phases that are coming through, that some of the residents feel that this isn't being presented as usable space. And that is, it comes back to this question of multifunctionality and what a community wants from their green space. So overall, for the development itself, it does deliver an integration of blue-green infrastructure within a quite constrained site. I think both the consultant and the house builder have been very diligent about delivering a scheme which is attractive. They provided basically a system which is cascaded, provides treatment, it's connected, and it provides a diversity in its landscape. From an approval point of view, as I said, we've been quite constrained on what we could do, but coming forward, we're up to phase 4 or phase 5 of this development now. One thing that we've learnt, I think, within the team is how we accommodate variations. When you have a master plan strategy that's been set and you're delivering something over 2, 3, 4 years, how do you accommodate change, which is happening within the design team? And the last ones, we are, as I said, up to phase 4, phase 5, and this question about usability being raised, and the original plan was to have a swale that operated between phase 4, phase 5, and the EDC themselves are saying, well, actually, the perception is that they want this as, I wouldn't say as flat grass, but they want it to be something that's not occupied necessarily by vegetation. And in amongst the discussions with the consultant and the developer on this one, it was quite interesting to see that they were coming up with these schemes that were beautiful. They were beautifully landscaped. They were fantastic. But in actual fact, that's not what they didn't really need to provide that. The LPA is sitting there going, we just want some flat green space. So I think this is something that we as, I guess, approvers or providers and looking at sustainable drainage systems, sometimes the gold-plated version isn't actually what's needed. They want something quite simple and quite straightforward. So as I said, I think probably the major benefit for this scheme itself has been the partnership working that's happened between us, KCC itself and the Obsolete Development Corporation. Obsolete is very, very supportive of a sustainable drainage approach, and it's something that they really want to see in all the schemes that they've got, but they are hampered a lot by the existing planning conditions. We've worked quite closely with the consultant, WSP, early on from sort of before they came forward with working out the drainage design. And that's something that we quite promote within Kent, early engagement within the master planning, or even when they're first looking at land parcels coming on, part of their due diligence, we're more than happy to sit down and look over what constraints they have on a drainage perspective. But that has gone all the way through their submissions, and we're now talking about the verification report for this site. And to be honest, it's actually going to probably be one of our first proper pilots, really. We've tested the pro formas on them. WSP have been quite supportive in helping us look at issues with what we're asking from consultants or for submissions within planning applications. And so it's been exceedingly beneficial. And again, we've worked with the house builder. We're now in a position with Red Row where we have ongoing consultations on their sites. And instead of doing a normal meeting for every site that comes through, we have please give us a call and we'll just track the hours and invoice you at the end of the year. And that's actually, that open door policy has promoted the ability for them just to drop in and ask some simple questions about sites and allows them to go away and think about it. I think that's probably been the one key thing I would really love to replicate with all of our house builders, because more often than not, they come to us, I wouldn't say late in the day, but later in the day, and some of the issues could have been avoided if they'd sort of just picked up the phone. So I think that is of the one thing that I would definitely like to replicate. I've also found, because Red Row sort of bought into biodiversity delivery, it's much easier, and there are other house builders who have got a similar, I guess, corporate objective, and I think that's one thing that really helps us in our objectives. If they themselves have a corporate responsibility, for wanting to deliver biodiversity net gain or environmental benefits, then we've got greater chance of delivering schemes that we would say are very good sustainable drainage schemes. So, any questions?
Anthony McCloy, McCloy Consulting. Hi, Bronwyn. Good to see you again. Two questions, if I may. First one is related to the multi-phase development. Was there any consideration given to the development of a design code for SuDS for that multi-phase scheme? And do you think if there had been, that might have taken out some of the difficulties with the future changes, now they could have been accommodated? And then the second question was around the permeable pavement. You had mentioned Kent only adopt free draining permeable pavements, and just to get clarity, why you wouldn't take sort of more tanked permeable pavements?
Okay. Design code situation, I think in this case it's more about contributions coming from each of the phases, so it's not necessarily the way the system looks. It's about ensuring that each of the schemes is meeting what the strategic framework was saying that that phase was going to deliver. So if they're going to change, as they did, I think it was, I'm going to say, commercial to residential in one little area, we need to be sure that the discharge rate coming from that particular area is still compliant with the master strategy and can be taken in the trunk system. Design codes are interesting. I've got other sites, 8,000 unit sites, 3,000 unit sites, where a design code would be a better approach, but more often or not, they are phased, as you would say, they are subcatchment phased, and there's a sustainable drainage measure for each phase. So I'm not sure, I think that would probably create more work for us, I suspect, for me, sitting within the drainage function. In relation to permeable pavements, highways have taken a view that if it's free draining and the subbase is therefore acting like a normal road, it's a highway asset. If it's tanked and holding water, it's operating in more reality as a drainage asset. That's their view.
Point taken.
Any more questions in the room?
Was the child found? Was the child found?
Yes, the child was found, and we'll see, because I haven't seen the photos of the site in recent months, but there was a proliferation. We went up there on this team day, and there was this proliferation of signs that said, you know, warning, deep water. And we're all looking there going, there's no water in there. And it does raise that issue about risk, and, you know, we talk about this a lot, about things being fenced. I still have struggles with authorities who want to fence things in a substantial way. That hasn't gone away. We might be more relaxed about it these days. We might have a design approach which we think is more beneficial to it, but people in the community don't see that.
Any more questions in the room? Whilst Paul's walking to the back, I've got a question for Bronwyn. I asked the guys earlier how they ensured stakeholder engagement through the process. So I'm going to ask you the same question. And who do you think is central to maintaining that stakeholder engagement?
You mean the actual development application process? We don't. We're reliant upon them coming to us. Unfortunately, we don't have that central team approach as Gateshead. I'm reliant upon the local planning authority informing me. But one thing I have found, our team, the Flood and Water Management team, sit next to the Natural Environment Coast team, and that's where our biodiversity officers sit. And that has become sort of quite key in actual fact. We've got a number of schemes that have come through that delivered biodiversity enhancements that have, I guess, overlapped with sustainable drainage systems. And that's when probably our best examples have come out of, I guess, multifunctionality and best working together. So it is about that teams being together, I think, is really beneficial.
Hello, Bronwyn, thanks. You talk about the importance of the communities understanding the environment that they live in. So what are you doing as a local authority to try and change those new residents' perception of what that space is designed to do and who's responsible for what?
That often comes more from the developer than it does from us. But we do have a land drainage engineer, and we also had an engineer within my team before he upped and left and went to highways, who did a lot of interaction with parish, both councillors and residents. And that's we've actually found is quite key, not just alone for developments, but also the way ordinary watercourses work and such. So I think going forwards, we've done more consultation, more working with the Kent Association of Local Councils, which includes all of our parish councils, because they're actually, I think, the primary, representative on the ground for when things go wrong. It's your parish councillor you call, and we find they're quite effective when usually we have to, appease them. So yeah, they're quite effective in dealing with problems.
Any more questions in the room? One more. Time for one more.
So I don't take questions from Hertfordshire.
I'll stop now then. John Rumble, Hertfordshire. You mentioned obviously Development Corporation is somewhat different to a normal planning authority. For your planning authorities, how engaged are the planners actually in the SuDS process, both from a design and approval point of view? And to what degree do you think they're overly reliant on the LLFA?
I would say they are entirely reliant upon the LLFA. As I said, only 2 authorities have got engineering or have had engineering experience, and they've actually deferred to us in the planning area because we've got the expertise and we've got the team. I've had struggles when I've gone forward with, I've had a couple of basins in one particular scheme, and I thought that they could have much higher value to the development. I rang up the planning officer and I said, you need to do something more about this. You know, this isn't good enough because I've got an engineering design here and it's not integrated with the landscape design. And his response was, it's at the other end of the development. No one's going to use it for open space. I don't really need to do anything about it. And that struck me that they have actually turned around to me, and because I represent all 13, they don't have either the resources or the time to deal with policy on multifunctionality. And it's going to fall to us as the LLFA to define multifunctionality for them. It's probably more effective, to be honest, but it does put a burden on us when I'm an engineer and haven't got landscape background, I don't have planning background. It will mean that we will have to give a commission to work at what sort of policy we're going to use to define how you tick off all the boxes for multifunctionality.